What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. I'll be going over which running backs you should be trading for after week 1. We learned a lot after just 1 week, but there's still plenty more we're going to find out over the next month or so. One thing I want to remind you is not to panic sell. Just because a player on your team had a down week doesn't mean they're going to have a bad season. Right? There are a number of players that we went over last week who had pretty difficult matchups, and football is a sport that has a lot of variance. So players are going to have ups and they're going to have downs. So we'll focus this video and the wide receiver video tomorrow on opportunity. Which players are getting a ton of high value touches and have been underperforming in fantasy given that volume. Now, we've only had 1 week to work with, so again, let's be careful not to overreact. But we'll take a look at some players who saw solid volume or that I expect to see a bump in opportunity moving forward and that I'd be looking to trade for. Before we start, of course, have to do the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was in week 1. Which quarterback had the longest completed air distance? And the answer was Josh Allen. Colin Ball was the first one to get that one right. Today's stat: Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, David Johnson, and Ezekiel Elliott played the most receiving snaps among running backs, who played the 5th most. All right, let's talk about some running backs. And first up, we're going to go over D.Swift. Most people will look at the 17 touches for Adrian Peterson and be scared off, but I am not. Swift led the backfield with 44% of the snaps while running a route on 49% of the Lions' dropbacks, both of which easily led all Lions running backs. Swift is very clearly going to be a featured weapon in the passing game, and his early down role is going to expand throughout the season. His scoring a touchdown is going to boost his value. If you're trading for him, you prefer that he didn't score, but people are going to look at those 3 total carries and get concerned. Remember what the Lions said before the season started, though. They really like him, but he was behind after both a shortened off season and then suffering an injury in camp. So we were expecting him to start the season slow, and then get ramped up more and more every week as we move forward. This is probably the cheapest you'll be able to get him for the rest of the season, because if he goes out there and increases to 5 or 6 carries and gets another 5 or 6 targets, then people are going to realize that his role is expanding. But I really don't think many people see it that way right now because of those touches. Again, Peterson had 17, Swift had 6, and then Kerryon Johnson had 7. But the snaps were split 24 for Peterson, 34 for Swift, and 20 for Kerryon Johnson, with Swift seeing 8 of those snaps at wide receiver, which we obviously love for fantasy because targets are worth nearly 2.75 times more than carries. So it's pretty simple with Swift. He's a talented player on a very good offense whose role is going to expand, so you got to try and trade for him before it's too late. Next up, we have another rookie, and it's Z.Moss. Now, I'm sure the vast majority of you already own him, but if you don't, then this also might be the last time you're able to get him for a cheap value. He did score 11 fantasy points, so it's not like he had a bad week, but his role was exactly what we thought it could be, which means that his ceiling is insane. Moss ranked 4th among all running backs in expected fantasy points last week, and it went Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then Z.Moss. 4th among all running backs in expected fantasy points. Why did he see that much? Well, because he had an insane 8 red zone carries to go along with 2 end zone targets. The 8 red zone carries were 3rd among all running backs, and he joined only Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley and D.Swift as the only running backs to see any end zone targets. And again, he had 2. We said this summer that Moss was going to be the red zone back, and he was going to have an early down role, and he was going to get work in the receiving game. And that's exactly what we saw in week 1. Now we get to match up with the Dolphins, where the Bills are favored by around a touchdown and projected to score into the mid-20s and could easily hit 30 or 35. If Moss sees this sort of volume again, and not only this overall volume, but this sort of high value touch volume, he's not going to get 20 touches in a game where Singletary is healthy, right? Like if he gets 20 touches against the Dolphins, it's because the Bills just crushed them, which I guess could happen, but it would mean the Bills are up huge early and they're running it like every play in the second half. But in a normal game, he's not going to see 20 carries with Singletary healthy. But if his touches come in the red zone, in the receiving game, then he can produce unlimited touches. And if Singletary ever got hurt, he's a running back 1. So I value him right now as like a low-end running back 2 to a flex play. And I really think in the trade market, you can get him cheaper than that, so you should. The next player is actually a trio. So there's a group of 3 players that I find kind of similar. You won't be able to get any of them cheap, but I want you guys to test the waters with these guys and just see what their owners are asking for right now. Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor. These guys didn't really dud or anything. I guess Mixon you could say dudded, and I guess you could say Barkley did because he had 15 carries for 6 yards, but he kind of made up for it in the receiving game. But I want you guys to just test it, even if you can't get a deal done. Planting a seed in the trade market can be very useful. So what do I mean by that? Let's say the Joe Mixon owner is 0-1 right now, and part of that would likely be due to Mixon only scoring 5.5 fantasy points. They know that he's going to do better than that on average, so they're probably going to ask for mid to low end running back 1 value in return. But if you go over trade discussions, can't get anything done, what also happens if he duds on Thursday night? Now, you might be watching this on Friday, maybe he went off, but for those of you watching this on Thursday night, and you can actually, or Thursday afternoon, and you can trade for him, what if he does have a mediocre game? And now they're even more upset heading into this week. You're going to be the first person they look to get a deal done, and they're definitely more likely to get a deal done as well. I mentioned Mixon and Barkley because they combined for 75 rushing yards on 34 carries, and we had extremely high hopes for them entering the season, so their owners are going to be a little bit upset. But they're Saquon Barkley and Joe Mixon, and so you should still be expecting their owners to ask for running back 1 value, but why not see? Why not take a chance? Maybe they're just completely fed up and they just want to give them to you for lower value. I guess that's possible, but if anything, get their mind thinking about a trade. Because if either of those 2 busts again this week, then they're much more likely to get a deal done moving forward. And no, I'm not overly concerned with either of these 2. Mixon still dominated the snaps, and we should expect his targets to go up as Burrow gets more comfortable with the offense, and they're not playing in just terrible game environments. And then, of course, Saquon Barkley is just a freak. He had the most difficult matchup you could think of, and so it's not shocking that he didn't have a fantastic game. As for Jonathan Taylor, he's a running back 1 now, and probably a mid-range running back 1. So I know it seems like you'd be buying high on him, but again, it doesn't hurt to just see what his owner values him at. They might only be asking for high-end running back 2 value in return, in which case you should take it. At this point, moving forward, I would prefer Jonathan Taylor over Melvin Gordon, David Johnson, Chris Carson, Austin Eckler, Kenyon Drake, and maybe even Nick Chubb. That one's a lot closer, but you get the idea. He's a mid to low end running back 1. So if you can package him in a deal with a mid to high end running back and then maybe add on a tight end if they need one, do it. Look at their team and just see, because trading is about value, right? So if someone drafted Jonathan Taylor in the 5th round as their 4th running back, that's fantastic for them and they're probably going to crush. But maybe they view that as a situation where they need a high-end wide receiver. And so if you were someone who took the opposite end of the spectrum, you went heavy on wide receiver, took some running backs in the mid to late rounds that haven't really panned out, well, why wouldn't you get in a trade with this team? They're lacking high-end wide receiver production, and they probably hit on a few running backs, and you're lacking a stud running back, and Jonathan Taylor is now, like I said, a mid to low-end running back one. So you don't need to dominate a trade. You need to look for a team that has the pieces you need, but you also have the pieces they need. So don't be trading Noah Fant and Dallas Goedert and TJ Hawkinson to a player that has Travis Kelce, right? Because they're going to value those players less. They're going to look at them and say, well, I don't need those guys. I know they're awesome, but I don't need them. So why would I trade away Jonathan Taylor? But if you look at a team that has terrible tight ends, and they're really weak at wide receiver, maybe they will accept a deal where you give them a solid wide receiver and TJ Hawkinson. So it's really about looking at the team you're trading with and packaging a deal for players that they will value highly, as opposed to just blindly sending trade offers. The last two players we'll go over today is Antonio Gibson and Leonard Fournette. And please hear me out before you click off the video after that one. No, I do not like Fournette. That has been made abundantly clear throughout the years, but he only played 9 snaps, in a game that most people watched. I feel like that was one of the more watched games this weekend. Obviously, we had the Chiefs and Houston game was huge, but everyone was tuning in to watch Tom Brady's debut with the Bucs, especially playing an awesome team in the Saints, right? Everyone watched that. And so it's very likely the people who drafted Leonard Fournette watched that. And they saw him get 9 snaps and result in 5 carries for 5 yards and a 14-yard reception. And so they're going to be looking at that and be like, oh, I guess it actually did mean that Ronald Jones was the lead back, and they're probably going to ask for a much lower price than they would have a week ago. But we knew this would happen. I've been saying since the trade happened that he's likely going to start off with a very limited role because he just joined the team. He literally just joined the Bucs. They're not going to throw him in there for 90% of the snaps. But he is the favorite to lead this backfield as the season progresses. So he's the one I want. And again, plant the seed. Even if you can't get a deal done before Sunday, send an offer. And if he plays another 10 to 12 snaps, then you're more likely to get a deal done next week. I would be offering probably low-end flex value right now, preferably in a position you're abundant in. Make sure you don't go overboard. But if you drafted like we like to draft, where you're filling out a ton of running backs, a ton of wide receivers on your bench before going to quarterback, before going to tight end, then I really think you're going to have a piece. You're going to have your 4th or 5th wide receiver is going to be pretty solid because of how you drafted, and maybe their owner will flip Fournette for one of those pieces. But again, you're not going to know until you ask. As for Gibson, it's sort of the same deal. He was 3rd in snaps on his own team last week, and it was looking like he was going to be the feature back in that game for those first few series, and then they barely used him after that. But we know with a fairly high level of confidence, he will be the featured running back at some point in this season. So now is the time to try and capitalize on a low volume week, and for him, I'd be looking at kind of that same value. I'm not going overboard. I'm not sending in, a pretty nice running back 2 or a high-end wide receiver for Antonio Gibson. He's still on a bad team, and we still don't know. I say we have a high level of confidence. That doesn't mean 100%. He might not be the featured back at any point in the season. But I'm pretty sure down the stretch he will be. And so if you can offer a bench player who on average on normal teams would be like a low-end flex, I think that's smart because I'm sure a lot of people are going to be scared after his limited touches. And again, he's a rookie in a limited offseason who had 77 touches in his career leading up to this. It's not shocking that he started slow. So those are some running backs that I would be looking to trade for this week. Again, do not panic if your team didn't go off. These guys have had 4 quarters so far after no preseason. Let's be aggressive in going after the players we like, but don't be trading away studs for just pennies on the dollar. Also, if you want to see a complete list of players I'd be targeting in trades and who I'd be trading away, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.